What's going on YouTube? This is Rybo at the bench, and today I have another cutter carry knife review for you today, and a drink to keep the lemon theme of the video going. And also because if you can't tell from my voice, I have a cold, and so this is my cough medicine, bourbon, honey, lemon mixed up. I know I'm typically not an ice person. I think it's sacrilege to put ice in bourbon or whiskey, but if it's for my my cough medicine here, I'm okay with it. So getting down to the video, today I have a review of the Spyderco Assist. This is the H1 version. Very, very interesting knife from Spyderco. I've had this for a couple weeks, so thought I would do a review of it. All right, let's do some baseline measurements, and then we'll get started. All right, so this is a very interesting knife. So you see a lot going on here. In fact, before I do the measurements, let me just give a rundown of everything that this knife has to offer, because this is not a typical knife, obviously. So if you see, obviously, the serrations on the blade here, and then at the very front, you have about an inch, inch and a half, we'll measure in a second, of just sharpened length with that blunt tip, which is really nice. This is obviously a rescue knife. Spyderco has several different rescue knives that they offer. This is the Assist version, but this is really made for, you know, if you're cutting seat belts, so you're pushing that into someone and kind of getting in there to be able to cut, or if you're, you know, cutting clothes off and you want to be able to push into someone's clothes and obviously not cut them, you can kind of get in there and hook with that little piece right there, and then you have this sharpened edge here. Also this serration for cutting rope, cutting clothes, stuff like that. You have a larger spider hole here that works very, very well to open. I'll get to these finger grooves in a second. It is a back lock, and a very nice back lock. I think works very well. The FRN Bi-Directional Texturing, a nice wire pocket clip, and you have these deep finger grooves. You have a whistle right here. Let me actually, here, I'll go off camera and try that out. That probably sounds terrible on the video, but that is a whistle. It can be very loud. I did not really test the limits of it, but I have at home. It can be very loud. Really interesting thing to add there. And then let me talk about a couple other features. So one is this grip that you see right here. So it's not very often you see this kind of grip that corresponds to this. But this is for two reasons. So this is meant to be gripped like this, and it is very ergonomic to do so. One is that if I squeeze on this grip, notice right there, the carbide tip comes out. So this is actually a glass breaker. So really, really cool functionality there. This is to keep it from being exposed all the time. Obviously, that is a very hard piece of metal right there. And so that would, you know, potentially cause some damage if that was just sticking out all the time. So they've made this really, really cool feature that allows you to just deploy that when you need it, and then you can use it. Where you can see I've just put some dents in the workbench here. So that is really, really cool. Really, really cool piece of functionality. And then the other reason that you have this kind of grippy whatnot here, and I should have grabbed some rope. Actually, strike that. I have rope on the workbench. Not very thick rope, mind you, but I do have some twine. So the other reason for this is that they allow you to scissor cut rope. So the idea being you can put something in here and squeeze it shut instead of having to kind of saw. So we'll test that out. Obviously this is kind of meant for some bigger purposes, but the idea would be you put that there, you scissor cut this, and you've cut the rope. I don't know if that was very clear. Let me try that again. You scissor cut like that, and you've cut the rope. So that's pretty cool. Very, very cool that you can kind of use the knife in that way. This is kind of hard to show because you've got to have some tension, but works very well. I mean, you know, it's one of those things that I think looks a little bit gimmicky at the start, but in practice actually works quite nicely. So that's a very cool thing. All right, so I've just gone through pretty much all of the knife's features, but let me go ahead and do the review, or do the size check. So sharpened blade length, looking at the serrations and the straight part, you're looking at over 3 inches. If you look at just the serrations, we're looking at 2.3-ish. And if you look at just the straight sharpened blade length, you're looking at about 3/4 of an inch. All in all, this is a large knife. So this is going to be pretty big in the pocket. Yeah, almost 5 inches. And it's also going to be very thick. So 0.67 inches in thickness, whereas typically in the knives I carry, they're around a 1/2 inch thicker. So, but that makes this knife very ergonomic, and we'll talk about that in a second. Let me go ahead and do my weight check and grab a little bit of the cough medicine. This is a fairly lightweight knife, so you can see under 4 ounces for about 5 inches in the pocket, which is not bad at all. So you can see there's really no liners or anything in that. So it's really, mostly FRN plus the other, whistle features and whatnot. All right, let's do, what are we going to do? Size comparisons with other knives. So let's see, in my pocket right now, just because I have it, the TRM Atom, which will be a fun review. Let's go to some other fun stuff. Let's do the Paramilitary 2, which is a good size comparison. You can see it's bigger than all of that. Let's see if I have anything else. I don't think I have anything else that's going to be as big. I have this Benchmade 580 that gets close to that, but you can see it is a very, very large knife. So it is easily the biggest knife that I own, both in terms of the overall length and in terms of the thickness. All right, so things that I like about the Spyderco Assist H1. One, I'm just going to say I love the knife. When you put it all together, I think it is a phenomenal knife. Now, it is a niche knife. There's no question about that. This is not one that's going to be in my pocket all the time. It is absolutely a niche knife that's very funky. Not really one that people are going to want to have in their collection, but I can tell you this is like the perfect car knife. This is perfect for when you want to have a little blade if you need to open something, but also, as ridiculous as it may sound, like this is a viable rescue knife. This is a viable backup, camping, that kind of thing knife. There are a lot of practical benefits to this, and so I love the fact that Spyderco made this knife. That's probably the number one thing I like, is that it's so funky, it's so innovative, and it's just showing Spyderco trying something different. You see this kind of thing, I think, executed very, very poorly from other companies. And so I love that Spyderco kind of did their own rescue knife, and they actually did it very well. It's very practical. It's not very gimmicky, at least to me. That's what I see. Other things I like about the knife, obviously the wire clip. I will say for such a large knife, it handles very, very well in the pocket. I've been very surprised. I haven't carried it a ton, but it does do very, very well. So the wire clip there, paired with the fact that, you have a lot going on here, but a lot of that is, as Spyderco likes to do, tucked against the interior of the pocket, which means you don't really have anything fighting your hand, which is, a really nice thing. Other things I like about the knife, let's see. So I love the carbide tip there, the glass breaker. I think that is just one of the absolute coolest functionalities of a knife. And so when you press down on that, you're extending. I think that is just, it speaks to what Spyderco is as a company, which is innovative, and they design for real practical use. I think that is just so cool. This may be an ugly knife, but it is very practical. Other things I love, I think that this is maybe the most ergonomic knife that I have ever felt in my life. This is, very, very thick handle materials. It's very contoured, very rounded. I don't know if that comes across in the video, but my goodness, it feels like it's just made for my hand. I talked about that with the Boker AK-74 full size. This one just kills it. I mean, this is absolutely made for the hand. It feels amazing in the hand. And honestly, that was one of the reasons that I did carry this knife for as long as I did, was because it just felt so great anytime I was cutting something. Other things I love that they added a little piece of straight blade to the end of the serration. Honestly, a lot of times you get either a half and half or full serrations. I'm not a serrated knife guy, but I think that this is just an incredibly practical blade for the type of knife that it is. Obviously, this is not going to be an EDC knife, but for that kind of backup knife or that rescue, camping, whatever knife, it's cool that you have not only the serrations, but you also have this little straight piece. While I'm talking about that too, this knife is a surprisingly good box cutter. When packages, come and they're taped and everything, this is actually really, really useful because much like, the reason that I like things like, these cleaver style blades, because they can pierce and then kind of, open packages, this thing is fantastic. This little hook here, because it is so thin, can really pierce. And then once you've got that pierce, you've kind of hooked on to that straight bit right there and can drag. And it's been surprisingly well at opening boxes where you wouldn't think really serrated blades are meant for that. And so I really, really like that. Other things, I think the backlock is a great choice. One of the things about this knife is that it is made for people who are wearing gloves, or it's made to accommodate that because of the type of knife that it is. I don't have any gloves on the workbench right now. I don't think. I can't really see because there's so much crap on the workbench. But for a couple reasons, this works very nicely for people with gloves. One is you have a very nice standoff between the hole here and the FRN handle. I've talked about that in the past with something like, what's a good example? This is a great example. The K-Bar Dozier. Love the Dozier. Do not like the Precision Hunter blade version and the one with the fake Spidey hole because you don't have much standoff between the hole and between the FRN. And so what that means is even without gloves, it's very difficult to kind of hook a finger in and open. However, with the Assist, you have a lot of space there. It's a bigger hole. You have a lot more material to grab onto. And if you get the orange version, and I forget what the real difference is beside the Cobra hood, they call it, they have even a little piece of metal that fits over this that allows you to even get a bigger grip when opening the knife. And I really, really like that. I think it works very well. It's very easy to open even if you're wearing gloves, and very easy to close when you're wearing gloves. You have a very, very thick piece here. If you compare that to something like the Chaparral, I think that's one of the #1 complaints about the Chaparral is that you have this little thin piece right here. It's just not super easy to get your hand in there. But with the Assist here, you just have a really, really beefy section, and it's very easy to disengage. That's why I think the backlock was the correct choice for this. If you had done something like a liner lock, frame lock, anything like that, even compression lock, I think it would have been very difficult to operate with gloves on or in an emergency situation. Now, again, I'm not a tactical guy. I'm not somebody who's really reviewing this for that, but this is what the knife was made for, and I can see that actually works. I think it's actually incredibly practical. So that is really cool. Other things that I like, let's see. I mentioned the clip, talked about the carbide tip. Let me take a drink break. I'll say finally the bi-directional texturing. I think that's another just very practical thing. They could have done a lot of different things. I just think it's a very practical thing. It doesn't look the best to me. I've never been, it's fine. It's become, synonymous with Spyderco. But, it's great. And I think it's very practical. It gives you just the right amount of grip, especially if you have these smooth portions here and you're kind of wrapping around. It cleans easily with like a toothbrush or something like that. It's going to be very, very functional. And I think at the end of the day, that is what this knife is about. And so that I really like. All right, so that does it for the things that I really like. Now let me talk about the things that I don't like. There are a couple. The #1 thing, honestly, is just the fact that, well, let me say it's a thing I like and don't like. The H1 steel. So this is Spyderco's H1. This is supposed to be their kind of salt version of knives where, rust is really a non-issue. They make these knives that they say that they will not corrode, right? That is the whole deal behind H1. I respect that. I think that's great. I think for a very niche market, that is a great option to have. Most people who own this knife, most people who own the salt knives, the H1 knives, I don't think fall into that niche. They do it because they want the yellow, which I totally get. I think it's a really cool color. Or they want the logo, or they just want something different. at the end of the day, the steel is not great. It's not going to hold an edge for very long, which does become problematic when you have these serrations, because you're going to have to sharpen all of that quite often. And you have this little flat bit that should be fairly easy to sharpen, but it's not really something you can do. Like, I'm a bench stone sharpener, so I sharpen on oil stones. This is going to be problematic. I mean, yes, if you have files and you know how to sharpen serrated knives, no problem at all. However, it just does kind of stink that on a serrated knife, and especially one so large as this, you do have such a soft metal that's going to require more sharpening, especially if you are using it. However, if this is just a car knife or something like that, it's not really going to be an issue, because you're not actually going to be cutting with it all that often, and you don't have to worry about kind of where you keep it. If you throw it in a toolbox in the garage, or you throw it wherever, obviously won't be as big of a deal. Other things that I don't like, probably only one other thing. I mean, I would say the size could be kind of a downer, but I don't think you can make this knife any smaller. It fits my hands perfectly. I'm not wearing gloves. It kind of does all the functions, and so I don't really think that you could get away with this guy being any smaller than it is. The only other thing I don't really love is the whistle. That, if there's anything that is gimmicky about the knife, I think that it's the whistle. I mean, yes, it's cool. Yes, it's functional. But I don't know. It seems a little bit gimmicky. It seems a little bit kind of what you see from other companies with these kind of rescue knives. I don't know how often someone who works in some line where they need a rescue knife like this is actually going to use a whistle. I don't want to speak for anyone in that line. If you're, somebody like that, feel free to post below. I would think that you maybe have other ways of alerting people, or, doing whatever. So it doesn't detract from the knife. It's a cool aesthetic. It's a cool feature to kind of show off to people. It's kind of, it is what it is. It's not a real downer to me. It's just kind of like, I could do without that. But it is cool. It's cool to kind of show off. But besides that, I mean, when I first saw this knife, I was like, yeah, I really want to check that out because it's so weird. Never really expecting to keep it. But I've just been blown away at how ergonomic and how useful this knife could practically be. So cutter carry for me, I will say this has been a carry for me. When it came, I was like, yeah, this is going to definitely stay in the collection. It's going to be a car knife. I'm going back on that a little bit because I've had the chance to swap this knife for something else that I want to try, but it's going to a good friend of mine. This is definitely one that I would like to have in the collection again one day. It's a very, very cool knife. You can get them for $100 or so. It's a very niche knife. It's not going to be for everybody, but it's super funky, and I think it just embodies Spyderco. Like, this knife is what makes me wear a Spyderco t-shirt. This knife is what makes me just love the brand. Not because I'm necessarily going to use this knife, but because they've created something that is so functional, that is so quirky and weird and niche and crazy, but it works. It just, when it's all put together for a very specific type of person, this knife works. And they've done an excellent job, in my opinion, in this knife. My wife called this, I think she called this the alligator knife, and I can totally see that. So thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, cutter carry for me, I would say initially carry. Effectively, it's going to be a cut right now because I'm going to swap it. But I do highly recommend this knife if this kind of thing appeals to you, if you like the rescue type stuff, or if you just want to see something a little bit different than your average knives. I think this is a very, very interesting option. Hope this video has been enjoyable, and I'll see you next time.